These are the earthy and full of life pine switches. In collaboration with Nick, a well-known designer in the Keep community, creating GMK sets such as GMK Lavender, Loobed Switches showcases their first custom molded switches, and Mr. Lubed himself really surprised me. Now, these are long pull linears with a stem measuring 13.7mm long. Our housing and stem are made of a soft palm material, and with the way our housings were molded, you can rest easy knowing that these switches sit tightly within your plate. These switches also use a 5-pin PCB mount. Our spring is a double straight spring, weighing at 61 grams and is a 20mm long spring as well. So when it comes down to lubing and pricing, here's what we got. For the unlubed switches, we have these priced at $5.50 per pack, or also 55 cents per switch. And for the hand lubed switches, we have these only priced at $6.50 per pack, with an only 10-cent increase per switch. I think we can all agree that lubing is a massive hassle, and with these switches being only priced at $1 more per pack for the hand lubed option, I really do think that the hand lubed option is a steal. Plus, Loobed Switches has an insane track record for the quality of their lubrication jobs. So, if you don't want to go through the hassle of lubing these yourself, the high quality hand lubed option is a huge must-have. Finally, saving the most obvious for last, these switches come in a nice dark green aesthetic, and really gives your board an earthy contrast as well. Now, getting into our sound tests, we'll be taking a look at these both lubed and unlubed, and both configs will be tested with and without foam. So let's see what Mr. Lubed has done for us today. Both with foam and without foam, these switches perform extremely well unlubed. The unlubed pines have a higher pitch sound profile to them, but also sound a bit soft, which is a weird way to describe them, but quite frankly, this is the best way to describe them unlubed. There is a bit of upstroke on these switches, so you will hear a tiny little snap when they hit the top part of the switch casing. Honestly, paired with the right board config, the unlubed pines can sound like one of the best switches you've ever heard, but there are still some factors that will need to be ironed out with some lubing. Lubing the pines will come at a cost of a few couple small differences though. Once lubed, the pines sounded a bit deeper and not as high pitched as they were before, and while there is still a tiny bit of scratching from the stem, it definitely isn't as much as they were unlubed. Also, that soft muted sound that was brought up before is a tiny bit more audible with the lubed config, but in person, I don't think of it as a bad thing for these switches. It makes it sound and feel as if it has a light thockiness to it, which sounds really good in regardless to our configs. So now onto how the switches feel. I noticed that the lube switches have a moderate to heavy resistance to them. So if you're a light typer, these switches might be a little bit harder for you to type on. On the other hand, the unlubed switches feel like they have a lighter resistance to them. Pressing up and down, these switches feel incredibly smooth, and that's thanks to the all palm design for these switches. The palm material is known to be a much softer material, which also tends to help with the smoothness of the switch. The lubing consistency is very impressive too. Each switch tends to feel similar to one another, and all these switches manage to get rid of all the bad icks of the unlubed switches. For a hand lubed option, this is really good. There is a tiny bit of stem wobble, but overall, everything is very well controlled and simple. Overall, these switches stand up to being a very good competitor with switches such as the Mode Obscuras. Both lubed and unlubed, the pines set some new standards for me when comparing whether a lubed switch is better than an unlubed one. Usually, I would just go ahead and lube most of my switches regardless of what I use. But now I think it's about time for me to experiment a little and see where my unlubed switches would fit perfectly. So if I manage to have this small revelation from the pines, I sincerely believe that anyone will be able to match these switches into their setup and create the perfect config right for them.